how can we, would it be helpful to relabel some things? Maybe like if you think about accessibility, it tends to be in the ghetto of, oh, I'm gonna help this very tiny market and there's no money there, as opposed to doing something that benefits everyone. How do we rebrand inclusion so that people realize, oh, it benefits me and I don't think of myself as someone who needs to be included?
That's such a great question. It's such a simple question that people forget to ask. And inclusion benefits everyone. When you see inclusion as the continuous effort to eliminate barriers and exclusions that allows everyone to meet their basic needs and also to meet their fullest potential on their own, that you create those systems where individuals can do what they need to do without facing barriers, that type of inclusion benefits everyone, and everyone can contribute to that in their own way. When you get everyone, this is my experience, this has been my experience training inclusion around the world. When I tell people, you need to keep an eye out for economic exclusion, political exclusion, and social exclusion, this is what you're looking for. So it's so simple. And another part of that that's so important is that, I mean, I am an inclusion architect. I build the containers, and then I also build the structures. You need to understand that, like, trust is a structure. A lot of people, when they have this conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, also peace work, they all say, yeah, it's structural. Yeah, it's structural. We really need the institutions to do that. But people stop there because it's like, okay, it's structural. Well, we can keep going. We can keep designing this. We can keep architecting this because it's actual tangible things that we can put in motion and that we can dissolve that would make it more equitable and inclusive for everyone. And so I think that is somewhere where I live. When people say, oh, it's structural, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, I do. Here's how you build it. Here's what you do. And what's also really cool about that is that most of the time, people, there are structures. So there's structural structural violence, people not having access to, let's say, food, or there's pay inequities that happen particularly for, let's just say, women of color with children. And then sometimes on the business side, they'll say, well, we don't have a problem with the wage gap. It doesn't exist. But what's interesting is when you deconstruct those structures, there's actually so much potential, because both a company that supports, so here in the Seattle area, we have a place where women who've experienced domestic violence and also their children can go. And a lot of companies support this organization. We also have a food bank, and that food bank ensures that we address childhood hunger and help families, because right now, especially during COVID, we are in a food shortage emergency. Like, it is emergency for so many people. And what it helps you to do is the company volunteers and sends money to the food bank. The volunteers and the money also go to the shelter that's helping individuals who've experienced domestic violence. You can remove both of the needs for these two different like symptoms by addressing wage inequities and making your policies easier for women who have children to work. And so you actually, and so what's so cool, but when you pull away the structures, you see, and this works in peace, this works in other things too, is that this barrier, this structure that's a barrier, is really just preventing you from seeing that you actually agree. You don't want childhood hunger. You want everyone to have access to food. You don't want individuals to experience domestic violence. You want to make sure they're safe. What you need to do with that when you backcast it, and so we were talking about the SDGs, if you want to increase the number of people from a certain group that are coming into your profession, address childhood hunger, address digital divide, and make sure that everybody has broadband, make sure that people have access to mental health care. And so it helps. And so Mark and I have the same brain, which I love. And so we can kind of shift in that orbit to figure out, okay, where are you? Because I can show you what I can see. And then once people agree, oh yeah, we all agree that children should have food, and we all agree that, we don't want violence against women and children, then you can get people to change the policies because they're already in agreement. and then it
Yeah.
dissolves the problem.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by, sort of like, because for middle class folks and very privileged people, they know that childhood nutrition is important because they make sure they obsess over what their kids make, right? I eat, like mothers, upscale mothers, and all the mommy bloggers are talking about, the organic food that they're blending and making by hand. So they know that nutrition is important. They're talking about all the enrichment programs. They know that this is important because they personally invest in it, right? And so they go, wow, if it's good enough for your kid, it's good enough for all kids. If
Yeah.
you think this is an absolute requirement, it's a priority in your household budget that you need to provide this for your kid, it needs to be provided for every kid. You don't need to be sold on the benefit because you're already paying for it, right? And so the question is, how do we scale it? And maybe if we scale it well, that's a benefit to you because you're personally paying out of pocket. But if we could collectively do this and do it at a very high level and lower the cost, that sounds like a win to me, right? So part of it is how we tell the story around this. So it doesn't feel like it's taking something away from people. It's not invoking scarcity or loss aversion. And I don't think the sufficient thought is given around how you frame the question and how you frame the potential solutions.
Mm-hmm. That's why you
So,
need art historians who work in inclusion and people who study philosophy and who can understand the frames. And you got to figure out which frame you're using. So what if I gave you a frame? I have a way for you to eliminate I have a way for you to help dissolve food insecurity for 1/2 of the children who currently require government assistance. Are you
and that
interested?
sounds like I'm interested, but there are a lot of people who say, "Well, I don't have any children; they're not my children, so why is it my problem?" Right? So then you always have to, even though don't want to center it on people, you kind of have to center it on like what's in it for them. It's always the what's in it for them. So, well, how would we say what's in it for that hypothetical person?
Sure, of course. Well, do you want additional innovations? Would you like there to be healthcare workers to take care of you during a pandemic? Would you like there to be individuals who help run the infrastructure that you rely on? You need to make sure that individuals can complete school because there's a lot of barriers for accessing education or even survival if you don't have access to food. And all you have to do is provide a living wage for the women on your team.
Yeah.
And you will eliminate
I, I look at pay gap and I go, that has to be like the easiest thing to fix in the UN Sustainability Development Goals. I
Yeah.
mean, that's like one payroll run away, where, a CEO, I mean, we're talking like Fortune 500 companies. I'm not talking about mom and pops, that they're different economic scale. But for the ones who can, you could say, all right, let me look, HR, this is the range that we have, so we have a min max because you got to reward people and you can have some incentive. And so you have some bars, but above that is like excessive, right? So we have that range. Okay, everyone needs to be within that range. Payroll, next payroll run, go fix it, done.
Yeah.
I mean, I know I'm being simplistic, but it could happen as quickly as that.
It can, and the SDGs, so the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, really help, and they also help with creating that frame that would allow it to scale, because you can find out what the objections are for individuals towards what you're trying to do, and you can find all of the interrelated, interconnected elements of that issue, and you can present it in all of those different ways, and you can just kind of, that's what I love about like the vision that people like Mark and myself have. You just tip it over until you get to the right tip that it applies to the person who needs to see that frame. But you can have multidimensional frames and just tip it over until it's what that person can see through.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So when so we've talked about inclusive innovation. What about inclusive leadership? What does that look like? I know that when I talk to people, sometimes these phrases are thrown around and people kind of go, uh-huh, uh-huh, but they don't have like a concrete vision of what these things look like. And because we're very monkey see, monkey do, if we can see a role model or like, you know, anything that shows an example, what's the dialogue? What did they say? What did they actually do in that situation? That can help shed light. People go like, oh, all I have to do is imitate that. I just need to follow that example. Super, super concrete. What does inclusive leadership look like to you on a day-to-day basis?
So inclusive leadership is it's a series of capacities that individuals can build, and they can develop. Everyone can build inclusive leadership skills. If someone is interviewing you for a job or they want to know whether or not you can help make their team more inclusive, most people and most companies don't know what the inclusive leadership skills and capacities are. And so it's kind of a false question.
Okay, so what are the capacities?
Sure, of course. So the inclusive leadership, you should be someone, when someone walks in the room to a team that you lead, you can see it, you can feel it, you can find out just by talking to people that level of trust that you have built. So for example, inclusive leadership is really creating this space that removes all of those barriers, and you need to understand how to eliminate all of them. And you also need to make sure that people trust you enough to tell you their brilliant idea, because you've put into a policy that anyone who shares an idea gets credit for that idea no matter what room you're in. And so it's practices, and so it includes that practice theory. There's a whole list of things that people can do. How do you, for example, if I was wanting to work with you, Margarita, the adaptive communication to talk from a global leader to like a sequential leader, how do we make it work so that the two of us can come together? Because a lot of times it's that difference in learning skills and learning what you can, it's that what you can see that's different, but people think that it's the culture or the social identity, but it's not. It's just your way you're learning things and how you digest details. And also how to have that dialogue of stopping and asking that person what page they're on. What do you see right now? Where are you? Also that integrity, that you never, ever, ever deviate from the integrity that you have promised your team when it comes to consistently standing up for them, making those opportunities, generating those opportunities for individuals so that they will continue to let you kind of push them where you might want to go. Creating that trust as a structure. Also, how you build it into the team so that, for example, if you're in a meeting and everyone, you have some people who are really rough and tumble, and then some other people who don't really do well in that situation. How do you navigate all the potential identity threats that could happen across the entire world of work for every interaction that people have throughout the day? So inclusive leadership is also, okay, I need to think about, this person's going to have a conversation with a client, or this person's going to have a conversation with a partner or a vendor or a customer. We've created inclusive, we've created kind of an inclusion bubble internally, but now they have to interact with the external world. How do you then also keep your individuals on your team safe when they interact with all the other partners in the value web across the entire world of work? And then also, how do you set those structures so that if they're on an online platform, so people are applying in the interview process, when it comes to who's selected, these different inclusive leadership capacities of building that talent and then accelerating that talent without creating the reflex response that person got the opportunity because of their social identity. Those are all skills that you can build so that it's seamless. And it is what I deliver in the Elliott Inclusion Incubator and Accelerator. It's a whole program of how to develop those capacities.
Wow, awesome. The one of the things that we did, we had a co-op last 6 months with 30 interns, and we had them write user manuals. Like 2/3 of the way through, and be like, oh, I should have had them do it earlier. And it was interesting. So we had like different like Myers, we said like there were like 4 different personality tests that they could do. So you put down your Myers-Briggs and your Kinsey and your DISC, and I looked at them and I go, okay, I know what my Myers-Briggs is. I tried to do the other personality tests, and I feel like, oh my God, they were like, I would look at these questions and I go, well, I could go either way. And so I just sort of bailed out of like the 3,000, one of them is like hundreds of questions, right? And I put, I'm a Sagittarian, I'm an INTJ, and I'm a Sagittarian. But it was interesting to see guardians. Oh, and I came out as an idealist in one of them. But our global operations manager is a guardian. I go, yes, absolutely, she's definitely a guardian. But with my co-op interns, so many of them were introverts. So, and they go like, what is your preferred communication style, right? They go, I don't want to speak up. like I think very carefully before, so they're not the kind of extroverted thinker who in a meeting is just gonna like just jump in and say something. They're gonna like hold back, think very carefully and very thoughtfully, and then they'll say something like 2 weeks later, right? And it was interesting just to get that explicit because in this remote working environment that so many of us have been thrown into, these were 30 individuals I have never met personally. I've never been in the same room with. And so how do you create practices for inclusion when you have this barrier? And how do you look at this barrier as a different kind of innovation space to create engagement and to span those differences, especially when you've got, and it isn't about ethnicity, it isn't about any of those identity profiles. It's almost like a neuro sensibility. I'm introverted. I don't want to talk. I'm not comfortable with seeing my face, on the camera, so I turn it off. Which means if you're leading the meeting, you're looking at a bunch of black boxes and you go like, is anybody there? Did they walk off and go to the bathroom? Are they eating a I mean, so actually has nothing to do with the labels that we're very fixated on. It's about other stuff. Advice, give me some wisdom on this.
This is my favorite. I love this. I do these personality assessments and horoscope, and that's my party trick. You bring me into a room, I'll read the room, and I'll tell you how everyone works together and what to do so that certain teammates who have certain skills that they can shine. And yeah. I love one of the groups that I first started for diversity, equity, inclusion was basically a hangout for introverts who don't want to go out to different meetings because it's too much anxiety to get from here to there. So how do you build community amongst us? And I really like what Otto Scharmer talks about when he talks about that social field and really building, like making sure that your soil, I'm also a gardener. So how do you make sure that the soil of your team is right so that the people who come in with their own unique talents and their own unique potential can grow to their fullest potential within who they are. And I think that the best part of that is seeing each of those individuals and their identity types and what they bring to the table and whether or not they're outspoken or whether or not they prefer to have more of a reflective response to something, that is a strength that you need on the team, because you can't have all builders, because you will make that is what gets people in trouble. And so seeing that is a strength for everyone. And then also as an inclusive leadership skill is to learn how to communicate in a way that provides the message in every single person's learning style, and that adaptive mm-hmm. communication skill. How do you as a person who has finite time, how do you make sure that your messaging goes to everyone? How do you make sure that you create an environment where everyone can do their best? And that could be also for people who work really independently, so that if you want to go with something, if you want to have an idea, if you want to run with it, run with it. And it's those, how do you set up that soil? How do you make sure that right. they have exactly what they need? And it is,
and also provide guardrails, right? So yes. Like here's the sandbox.
Yes.
Operate inside the sandbox. Whoa! But for a leader, it's almost I realize it's so much code switching, so much. And Chris Bennett and I talked about this years ago in terms of metaphors of game design. And he said, like, because he uses that as his sensibility and lens, looking at innovation in general. So because he doesn't design games anymore, he designs other stuff now. And he goes, if you're looking at communities, you have to learn the language that they use when they talk about what they talk about. He goes, so if you deal with, guys who are into CrossFit and into weight training, with the way they talk about fitness, they have their lingo, right? They're talking about keto and whey protein and macros and blah, 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 right? All this stuff. You talk to middle-aged women who are in Weight Watchers. They care about fitness as well, but there it's points and weighing in, and it's a whole different vocabulary and whole different focus, even though they're both ostensibly focused on fitness. But the way they express it, what they care about. The language is very different. So he goes, you wouldn't go to the Weight Watchers group and talk about keto or about macros. You wouldn't, or all that stuff. You would talk to them about points. And likewise, on the other side, you wouldn't use the Weight Watcher lingo over there because it just wouldn't land. So it requires a lot of awareness and actually taking the time to find out how about, like, I just discovered that okay, so I'm old, so I still say cool. Nobody says cool. Uh, but when you want to talk about something that's really great, you say it's cold. It's like, oh, really? That's the new term? It's cold? Okay. Trying to keep up here. How do you, and so as a leader, what's the mindset set or the spirit that you need to come into this with so that so you don't feel like, oh my God, I just don't, instead of rejecting that, how do you embrace that?
I'd flip the question. And so I could tell you about how to have a communication style that has like a polyhedral, a 20 sided dice, and you can keep flipping through. And I can teach people how to do that. But what's more important is if you as an individual leader have to have those different sides, I can teach you that. But what's more important is preventing the people on your team from code switching. So I'm well versed. I can switch to I can navigate every single person on all of my teams. I can navigate people in global discussions from 50 countries simultaneously, and I've never had a problem because I can switch. What's important is actually that the 25 to 35% of performance and cognitive ability of your team, that they don't lose out because they're code switching, trying to figure out where I am. And eliminating that is what you need to focus on, making sure that you create and that person can be who they are. That person can talk in the way that you talk, and you can be nimble. I can be nimble. It's much easier for an individual leader or a team of leaders to be nimble and to switch and to kind of roll that dice to find the people than to have 500 leaders each trying to accommodate me. So that's what I would put the focus on. I would switch the question. It's the wrong question.
Got it. Great, brilliant. Finally, intersectionality. One of our team members in The Hague, she's looking at, as we define what we're doing in our work, and we have our 3 pillars where we want to create a market signal for the value of peace. So it's the finance part. And then we catalyze a peace tech industry, which is, okay, so there's demand and there's supply, and then we use peace data and looking at the intersectionality is where the peace data comes in, because we can look at group identities, we can look at who you're interacting with, and so on. So we're pulling that word and appropriating it for our own uses, but it's a term that's thrown around a lot. But what does it mean in your sphere?
What does intersectionality mean? In
Yeah.
my sphere of peace work or in my sphere of inclusion work?
Yeah, both.
Well,
And why does it matter?
okay, so what do you want to apply it to?
Let's apply it to peace, because
Okay.
we're all about peace.
Okay, well, I would think about it backwards because I think about things backwards. And so you can't run a business if you don't have trust. And peace, inclusion, and equity are the preconditions to have a sustainable business. You just can't have a business if the people don't trust each other, you're not sure if the price is right, if people don't share information, all these other elements. And so I would flip that and then say, okay, we need to have trust. There has to be, there has to be high levels of social capital. People need to be able to get the information from each other. You need to trust your customers. They need to be able to believe that you're ethical. How do you do that for a prism of stakeholders? And making sure that what you're offering, there's the future fit benchmarks, as well as the positive pursuits, which is an outstanding way to kind of to look at that, or you can use the SDG targets and goals to make sure that you're applying to everyone all over, especially if you're a global company, where you take into account the interconnectedness of all the elements. It's not, intersectionality is for me, it's not so much the identity elements that intersect, it's the multi-level system interactions that happen. It's the bumper cars of exclusions and barriers, and how that happens, and how do you eliminate exclusions and barriers in that bumper car scenario of the multi-level system, so that people can navigate on their own independently without the barriers.
Yeah, and
I have to say, the coolest thing in the world is getting to see people who are already talented and already have all the skills that they need, and all they need is for us to eliminate the barriers. They're already awesome. You just have to get rid of the barriers. And so using the intersectionality to figure out where you need to pull the levers of change.
yeah, I think when you put it that way, the thing that comes to my mind as a tech Silicon Valley person is as you go, oh, in the tech world we call it interoperability. Right? It's sort of like, oh, we want these systems to be interoperable because I have my network layer and I have my hardware layer and I have my software layer, and we create APIs because we want this platform to be able to talk to that platform. And so we have to create an API so that the two systems can find the points of connection so you can pass the data through, right? Because that's what you want. And they're like, tools like Zapier that lets you move data from one application to another and move things around. And it's finding those intersection points, those union points in the data set, so you can move things around, and that's a good thing, right? That's sort of like the holy grail in tech. It's like we always want things to be interoperable because people are designing complex systems from a lot of different vendors. Talk about diversity and diversity of tools, diversity of tech, and it's all going to be in your shop, and it's all going to work together because you're actually your common goal. You have this goal of, I'm trying to create this platform for my employees or for my customers, and they all have to be able to log in and blah blah blah. So all the tools have to be able to play well together.
Yeah.
So programmers and developers already know how to think this way, but they do it with code. We want to extend that metaphor or that practice to say, how do we make people interoperable? Right? And so, oh, this is a barrier. What's the API layer that we need to create? Do we need to translate something, or do we fundamentally need to remove a barrier that isn't necessary?
Exactly. You
Right?
can totally explain inclusion, equity, and peace in terms of big data and
Yeah.
the data structures that are underlying. You can absolutely make that connection.
And given that so much of our lives are being architected through data structures, it seems like having those two worlds talk to each other is becoming critically important because, again, it's systems, underlying architecture, it's the built environment. And if those people who are writing the software code aren't aware of this, they may perpetuate barriers and blockers that they're not even aware of because they're not really thinking about the history of how those barriers came into being or why they're there. It's just a custom. It's like it's always been that way. They were never thought to question it. Um, this has been fantastic, Ash. Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask you three things. So for our audience of people who are listening, entrepreneurs, peace tech people, people who are interested in new ways of thinking about innovation, what are the three things that you would like them to think, learn, or do differently? What's your call to action?
My call to action is, first of all, everyone can learn inclusive leadership capacities and build those leadership capacities. Everyone can learn. And so wherever you are in your journey, to have confidence that you can learn these skills. You can learn to do this, even if it sounds abstract. It's tangible. We can work with that. And the next is really having conversations about collective intelligence, collective action, collective efficacy. And really a lot of the conversations focus on individual change, individual action. And you can't really focus there. It can't be just on individual change. It really needs to be about collective. And so making sure you switch from what you can do or getting someone to change their bias or someone to change their behavior to getting everyone to change in the entire space. And the next is I have this huge opportunity to share with everyone, which is that Peace Day is on September the 21st. And I will be hosting a series of conversations to gather the information for what people really care about for the UN 75 program. I want to make sure that everybody's voice has a chance to be heard, to say what is most important, what they're really worried about in their communities. I'm doing one for communities of color in the United States, as well as all of the Americas, Africa, people who are interested in gender equality, Europe, Americas, everywhere. And so keep an eye, follow me, Ashlea Elliott, connect with me on LinkedIn, and I will announce all of the different events there so we can get ready for Peace Day, September 21st.
Fantastic. And we will include the authors and books and everything else that you referenced in the show notes today for people who are interested. Ash, this was an awesome conversation. I feel so privileged to know you. If you have a course on inclusive leadership, I would sign up in a New York minute. So,
Well, thanks so much. I'll
let,
send you information about the incubator and accelerator.
fantastic. Thank you very much.
Bye.